All right, folks, how you doing today? Today we are going to be working on a leaking dipstick gasket on my 1996 Ford F350. There's a lot of videos that are out there. One thing I want to make sure is mine's just a little bit different, or at least a couple of little things to focus on. You do want to make sure that you remove the bolt there holding the dipstick in place so that you can then remove the top insert. You want to make sure you disconnect both batteries on both sides because you do have to remove the starter. The starter is just really large, and you got to make sure that you get that out of the way. So once you get the starter out of the way, my particular starter had 3 bolts, all of them 17 millimeter. A lot of people are saying that there's a 18 millimeter, etc., but mine are all these 17 millimeter. So once you get them out of the way, then you have a clear view of the actual dipstick and the gasket. And you can see mine's been leaking quite a bit. You don't have a view of the gasket, excuse me, but the nut that has to be removed. So then we'll be working on that from here. We'll come back to you. Bye-bye. So I am rigging my little safety device to keep this thing from falling down into the oil pan, the adapter, the dipstick adapter. And like the tips I've seen from others, what I'm using is a 50 caliber rod tied onto the shaft of the steel and then down and around the shank of the aluminum. And then I've got a double nut set here to nut it. And I'm going to put that into the bore where the dipstick normally goes, and then I'm going to push it down, but I'm also going to grab it with forceps or hemostats, as other people have said, and try and be able to maneuver it, because I can't afford to drop this thing in the dipstick. So that's where we're at right now. We're back now, and just to re-emphasize what we've done, we've removed the negative terminals from the battery. We've removed the starter, which on my model was 3 17 millimeter metric headed bolts. And then I've scraped around and cleaned, removed the upper dipstick bolt so that I could free up the dipstick and pull the dipstick out of the way. That's what you see there. And then I have cleaned around the dipstick adapter where it goes into the oil pan. Now I'm going to actually use a drill motor and clean that even better before I loosen the, just a wire wheel on a drill. And I'm going to clean that even better before I loosen that nut, because there's really no reason for that to be removable. I think when this is said and done, I very well may be putting some silicone on the outside. Now, what I've been told and seen is that if you over tighten these that large nut there, the dipstick adapter there then warps, pushes the old O-ring out and warps, and then it won't sit flat against the case. So even with a new O-ring, it may or may not seal up good, and that could very well be what I have going on. So I am going to make sure that once I put my new O-ring on, that I then tighten that up and snug that up. But then I'm going to probably put some RTV silicone sealant all the way around there and seal that to further try to keep any oil leak. Now I also picked up the Ford O-ring gasket. I didn't want to go with aftermarket, and I'll show you that part number here in a minute, and then we'll proceed. But I'm going to use 2 hands to clean this, to handle this drill motor, and then we'll start to move to the next steps. Thank you. Okay, so we're back with you now, and this is our Ford factory O-ring that fits that, and that number is F4TZ6753A. And that factory O-ring is what we're going to put in place behind this oil pan. Okay, so I've seen other people ask the question when they've dropped this in, is this magnetic? So here's your answer there. No, it is not magnetic. Okay, so you need to be real careful not to lose that. And I'm going to have basically two safety measures in place. I'm going to use the 50 caliber cleaning brush, but I'm going to only put it in there far enough that I'm really wanting to be able to grab it back out should this thing try and fall. Okay, I don't want it to I don't want to risk not being able to get it back out, and so that's how we're doing that. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab it with this forceps or hemostat. Now, one thing I have not advertised is this line I have on here. This is 18-pound test braided lead line that I got off one of the fishing poles, and that's what I'm going to use to dangle mine basically. So we will go from there, and I'll be right back to you once I have this all rigged up and the nut off. Thank you. Just kind of going through what I'm going to use here. I've already inserted the 50 caliber cleaning rod, and you can see that sticking out now. And then I have forceps or hemostats, 10-inch. I have both the bent tip and the straight, and I'm going to see which one fits better, and we're going to use the one that I think fits better. Thanks. Okay, so as you can see, I've pushed my seal back through, or my adapter back through, and I'm using my pick, and I've got that O-ring, and you can see how flattened out it is. And we're going to draw it out now. Oh, it broke. Okay, so my pick just broke it, and I just need to make sure it comes out clean, comes off clean. Need to use two hands for this. I'll get back to you. Okay, you can see my old O-ring came out in two pieces, and look how much it swelled compared to the new one. Okay, so now, as you can see, I've got the forceps holding my adapter in place, and I still have the ring right here, locking ring, and there's this little detent or triangle that sticks out right here that your notch on your adapter goes into, and there's two different positions. Mine was directly at 9 o'clock. So now I'm going to work that new O-ring down over my forceps and down onto the adapter, and then utilize my pick to just kind of push it down and get it pressed in there properly, and then we'll tighten that thing back up. All right. Okay, so as you put on your new O-ring, you've got the threads here, and then you've got this surface, and you have this step down here, and the oil seal needs to be pushed, or the O-ring needs to be pushed down into this very bottom portion of this of the adapter there, of the dipstick adapter. Okay, so to do that, you need to have some lubricant on it that will allow it to move. And what I've done is I'm using a transmission product called assembly goo, and I've put a liberal amount on my seal. Okay, that's what that blue is there. And now we're going to push the seal up and then through the oil pan and then onto the groove, onto the threads. Try and pull it tight. Okay, so as you can see, there's about 3 threads showing there, and what we've got to do is draw that back through, which will squeeze that rubber O-ring into place, because that rubber O-ring has to actually move into place, and it's pretty hard to put in place from when you don't have the pan down. So I notice a lot of people are talking about how it's cross-threaded, and I've been real careful to make sure mine doesn't cross-thread, but I'm not sure that someone hasn't cross-threaded it in the past. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So looking at my nut, it's actually got, you can see how the nut does not look flat, and it actually has threads that start a considerable ways in. So that's why we're having trouble pulling that back through and getting that to start. Now I could put it up there reverse this way and start it, and that might or might not clean up some threads or pull some things through. I thought I'd just go to Ford and get another nut, and when I went to Ford and pulled it up, the nut, there's the paperwork they gave me. The nut is number 6751 on this diagram, and but you also notice it says nut in parentheses, but it also shows the back part of that is 6751. So he was saying the nut was sold separately, but I think that because they're both 6751, that shows me it was done as an assembly. So he didn't have it in stock at Ford. I was just going to buy one anyway to get a new nut to reduce the risk of having problems. So I went to Salmon's and one of my local plumbing stores, and I found out that this actually screws right onto 1.25 inch galvanized piece of pipe. If I can screw it on by hand and screw it back off and it's tight but not binding, then I believe that that is what that is. So 1.25 inch pipe tap. They have an electrical box that he says is 1.25 inch, and then they also have a plumbing that's 1.25 inch. So with these, I may be able to go ahead and tighten down and pull that gasket into place. So that's what we're going to try and do next. We'll go from there. Okay, so what I decided to do, I took the factory nut, turned it over backwards because the threads are closer, screwed it on, had no problem whatsoever screwing it on without cross threading or anything, and it's pulled the adapter through and what appears to have pulled the gasket in place. So now I'm going to take it off, and hopefully I won't lose some of what's been drawn through, and be able to flip it over and get it back on. So that's what we're trying to do now. Okay, so multiple opportunities to pull this thing through with my nut, and my nut is just not flush. So every time I tried to start my nut, it would start to cross thread. Every time I would flip it over and put it on with the flat piece out, it would true up no problem. Now, as I was saying when I started this job, my intention, you can see I've scuffed and cleaned that pan. My intention is to silicone all the way around this anyway. So what I did eventually was I went ahead and tightened the ring up, and I'll bring a screwdriver here. I went ahead and tightened the ring up inverted, okay, flipped over and tightened it up. I mean, you're using channel locks on that nut anyway, and got it good and tight, and it pulled through, and I actually felt it when the O-ring moved into place, and then it got loose and it tightened back up again. So what you can see there is you can see that the actual nut is against the pan, the flat spot's out, and you can start to see the top of my 50 caliber rod there. I've already taken the forceps off, and my 50 caliber rod is right here. So as I go ahead and pull that out, there's my 50 caliber cleaning rod. Still clean, still able to, you know, I'll probably run some patches over it, spray some cleaner on it, but I'll still be able to use that for cleaning guns. And now I'm going to go ahead and silicone it because I don't need it to come off. I just need it not to leak oil. And then I'll put the dipstick back in. So that's where I'm at. I'll show you a picture after I've siliconed it and pookied it all up. Okay, not pretty, but as I said before, I'm looking for function. I'm not a professional mechanic. This isn't a customer's rig. I need this just to not leak oil. So putting that nut back on backwards and then sealing it with silicone like this is what worked for me. Now, another thing to keep in mind, if you don't know this, when you first pull this dipstick rod, there's two little ridges there, and there's supposed to be an O-ring in between those ridges. Make sure you've got an O-ring there, and make sure you change it. If you're pulling it out, you may as well change that O-ring real quick. So change that O-ring, we'll go from there. So now I've got to mount back up my starter, 3 17mm bolts, And then I'm going to let this set and let this RTV cure a while before I move the truck.